The Toronto real estate market is crashing. Prices continue to fall. Inventory is surging higher, and it just looks like a bubble that is bursting, quite frankly. So let's get right into this. First, let's start off with this chart because it kind of basically shows where we are right now. I said about this last year. I said we are likely going to see a bull trap. And I even said in markets, certain markets which are more affordable, you might even see a higher high in that bull trap. So obviously you can see on that chart there, it goes return to normal, but that can actually go above the prior peak that you see right here. That's definitely happening in Calgary. You saw prices contract last year, and now they're coming up, they're going even higher. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to get to this phase of the bubble, the fear, capitulation, and despair, which is coming because all bubbles eventually end. So let's get right into this. Let's take a look at the chart. You can see the similarities between that bubble chart and this chart right here. Isn't it kind of interesting? So at the peak, it was 1.3 million. It went all the way down to just 1,070,000. And now we're coming back down. We're at 1.14 million. So you're still above the bottom, which is right here, but you're coming right down, and listings are surging at a time when inventory should actually be drawing down. Listings surging, I might have an answer for that as we'll get into further on in this video. So it's very interesting what's happening. So let's see what the real estate board said. Take this with a grain of salt because remember, their job is to sell you real estate. So Greater Toronto real estate prices pull back for a third month. Greater Toronto real estate prices slip once again. The Toronto real estate benchmark price fell 1.3% to 1.12 million in September. In the city of Toronto, the benchmark dropped 1% to 1.1 million over the same period. The benchmark remains above last year's levels, but last month marked the third consecutive decline for prices, nearly wiping out all gains made earlier this year. So what does that tell you about the market and all those people who are saying, you know what, this is it now, the real estate prices are just going back to the moon? Obviously that's not the case, and the environment in bubbles gets really distorted. It gets really manipulated as well. So essentially, obviously, you can have fundamentals that go completely against what the market is doing when you're in a bubble. This is what I try and tell people. The market is not based on any fundamentals, so don't try and sit there and make sense of it and say it's population growth. It's all these different narratives which can definitely contribute towards it. But as we're seeing, why would inventory be surging higher if the population of Toronto is ripping higher, which we know it is? A lot of these people, obviously, they can't afford to buy a home. So I never understood that argument anyway, unless you're assuming all these people are getting mortgages and they would essentially be subprime, and that would make it even worse as a market. So I've never really understood that argument, but then people throw that around. It's such a common one. It was even on the Plain Bagels video. I was just like, oh, come on, man. He's much smarter than that. I know that. So anyway, Greater Toronto real estate prices resume downward trend. And, you know, just look at this. If you go back to 2013, so you're talking 10 years ago, the price was $483,000. And now we're at 1.1 million. And, you know, when you look at places like Phoenix, you have prices go down more than 50%, almost 60% in Phoenix. In fact, they went down more than that in some areas. So it can happen when you have a bubble. And believe me, this has been a massive bubble that we've seen in Canada of just unbelievable size. So it's kind of crazy what is going on. So this shows you Toronto home prices from the peak, and it shows you basically what's happened. So you went down here, you were minus 19% December 2022. Right now you're down minus 15%. But think about it, guys. We're talking about nominal prices here. We're not talking about inflation adjusted prices, because think about it. Even though, actually forget that, forget inflation adjusted prices. Let's just adjust prices for people's wage gains. Let's say the wage gains that people had over the past 2 years adds up to around 6 or 7%, which is well below inflation. So their actual purchasing power is going down. Somebody who earns $100,000, we know inflation has been 30% over the past 3 years. If they got 10% rise over that 3-year period, they've only got $80,000 worth of purchasing power. So they've got way less purchasing power than they had before that, yet the price of everything has gone up, even real estate, against those fundamentals which have been happening. So it's an interesting one to think about. But obviously inflation, these aren't adjusted for inflation. So down here you're probably like, I don't know, I would say minus 25%. And now down here you're actually below this in real terms for sure, because you've had all the inflation over this past year in 2023 that you essentially have to tack on to this number right here, and obviously the wage gains that come along with that as well. And doesn't it just look so similar to this picture here? I mean, it is so similar. It's kind of crazy. But anyways, it's interesting because I saw this come out from the Financial Post, and they actually said home prices went up. And this is where things get so confusing with the real estate data in Canada. Most of the real estate data is obviously coming from real estate boards. Can you really trust that data? A lot of that data is wildly manipulated, just like the data that comes in from Statistics Canada and the government. Obviously, it's manipulated because they have their own agenda, which is to increase sales. It's to sell more property. That's why most places aren't even putting out charts. I mean, hats off to Better Dwelling for actually producing that chart which shows price, because you barely see any charts for price in Canada. Because if your real estate agent produced a chart to you, like let's say you're buying a house in Calgary right now, and then she says, here's the prices. Oh, we're buying at all-time high. Doesn't that seem like you get a lot of people question that and think, that doesn't really seem like a good idea, especially if they look at last year and see, prices went down around 13 to 15%, and then tack on inflation to that as well. So, and then you just have hysteria and the market just goes into a mania, and then essentially all fundamentals just go out the window at that point. It just confuses people when you have articles like this. I think Better Dwelling is a better source of information. It says right here, at the same time, new listings surged. In September, 16,258 new listings came onto the market, a 32% increase from August and a 44.1% higher than a year ago. So that is substantial, because we've constantly heard time and time again, supply, supply, supply. And as I've said to you guys many times, at the top of markets, especially market bubbles, you generally see supply that is constrained. That generally happens, and that can cause really whippy price moves as well. I mean, you've still got markets that are really struggling with low supply, but if you're thinking that's just going to continue indefinitely, and you're accompanying that with an argument that is a narrative-based argument about immigration or population growth, then I think that's entirely stupid. You shouldn't really be doing that, because essentially what you're doing is you're trying to make it seem logical why prices are going up in a mania, which is essentially when prices are going up against all fundamentals. Because if you take Calgary, for example, the wage growth there has been one of the worst actually in Canada over the past 7 years. If you actually look at it, it's been one of the worst. It's still one of the best cities for average household income. Slightly skewed though, I think, by a lot of high income earners that then skew the numbers, because there's definitely a lot of jobs that do not pay that well, and services cost more as well in Calgary. So there's higher prices as well that you get with that. So it's interesting, but the higher wages in Calgary, wages haven't been going up that much. So people's purchasing power in Calgary has been going down even more. So people have lost even more money there. Yet you see the real estate market ripping higher right now. Well, it's not really ripping higher either. I would say it's sort of a distorted market by that low supply. Buying into a market like that can be incredibly dangerous, especially at the peak. So none of us know what's going to happen, but doing that, I mean, you think about that. That left the sales to new listing ratio at 28.6%, firmly in buyer's market territory. The Canadian Real Estate Association, CREA, has said that an SNLR between 40% and 60% is indicative of a balanced market. Below 40% suggests that buyers have an advantage, while above 60% points to a seller's market. So you're definitely seeing, obviously, sales that are going massively lower. whilst inventory is ripping higher. So you're seeing the exact opposite of what you would want to see in a healthy housing market. So look, you've got the sales there and the new listings, and they're going in opposite directions. And this is unusual. We're seeing even that trend in Calgary. Actually, sales are starting to taper off, and you've still got new listings that are going up. And this is not normal to happen at this time of year. Anyone in real estate will tell you that for sure. And then obviously in Toronto, you've just got a ton of Airbnbs. You've got 18,921 listings in Toronto. You've got these Airbnb regulations that are coming in like crazy. But I wanted to show you this because this might explain some of what's going on. So you've got Airbnb revenue that is down. It's down 11% over the past year. Again, think about what's happening with inflation, guys, and the fact that people's businesses are losing that year over year. I mean, what do you do when you're essentially having to charge whatever the market is willing to pay? I mean, that's what Airbnb is. You can't just charge whatever you want. Well, you can, but then you won't get any bookings. So it's really interesting what's happening with the Airbnb situation. Average daily rate is down 7%. Occupancy rate has fell 17%, as you can see there in Toronto. So it's interesting. And then if we go down, I wanted to show you this. So the rental growth in listings has been very, very high. As you can see, since 2020 in Toronto, it kind of went down, which is what you would expect during a recession. And then it ripped higher during the free money. And even into 2022, 2023, it just ripped higher. And now you're seeing this really come back down. So it's going to be interesting to see. This is such a recent thing, the drop off in listings. Are those listings going onto the real estate market predominantly, or are they going onto the rental market and affecting rents? Because they're going somewhere. That's the fact. They're either going to go into the real estate market. And I believe this bubble has just popped. There's just not going to be unwavering demand for Airbnbs into the future like these people thought. You're already seeing the occupancy rate fall 17% year over year. And look what's happened. When you look what has happened, it becomes obvious why. It's because you've just seen absolute saturation. Even if you had, you'd need demand growing at this pace. And do you really think, guys, that demand is growing that much in Airbnb right now, considering what is happening with spending, growth in the economy? I mean, there's still people out there, still a lot of people out there spending money, especially in restaurants and malls and things like that, on the credit card. And they're trying to maintain their lifestyle. And that's a little bit of the lipstick effect. You can look that one up. It was one of you on this channel a while back that got me onto that. And that's really interesting to explore about. You know, essentially you're having this happen. So Airbnb is popping. It's not just in Canada either. You're seeing in Puerto, Vallarta, the airport says that they're getting a second straight month of decline in international tourists. That's not really good. And it's down about 9% year over year. So you've got this decline in volume that they're getting. Loads of people flooded into Mexico. All the stimulus money from the US and also Mexicans piled into the Airbnb market in Mexico. It has become absolutely saturated. And obviously Mexico was in a unique situation during 2020 and 2021 because there was a lot of demand because Mexico was open. So a lot of people were vacationing there. A lot of people were seeking refuge there. And essentially, obviously now you can travel everywhere. Everywhere is open. So all those people who were going to Mexico, they're not necessarily going there anymore. So you're going to see a decline. And obviously a recession is going to affect there as well. And some of the market's growth, like Cabo San Lucas, is just absolutely insane and completely unsustainable long term, especially considering the amount of construction. And, you know, Urbanize talking about this as well. Airbnb crackdown. Canada may tighten regulations on short-term rentals, and it mentions a couple of things. But it also says New York recently passed a law that essentially bans all short-term rentals in the city with very limited exceptions. Santa Monica got rid of 80% of its Airbnb listings by implementing rules that require anyone offering rentals for less than 30 days to live in the property during the renter's stay. Apparently not everyone wants to share their beach vacation house with a stranger. European cities like Paris, Barcelona, Amsterdam created stricter regulations, including banning the purchase of housing specifically to use as short-term rental and charging higher tourist taxes for short-term renters. You're only going to see this increase. People just don't like Airbnbs in their neighborhoods. And the other thing, even the hotel that I'm speaking to you in right now, I've got a video that I'm yet to edit, but it will be edited and put up on the channel at some point. Basically, hotels are also trying to capitalize on what's going on with the fall of Airbnb, essentially. Because like the hotel that I'm in right now is like a 1-bedroom suite. You've got like a nice living area here. You've got a nice kitchen. This hotel's only 6 months old, and it's got like 5 or 6 of these suites on each floor, and it's a 4-story hotel. And then all the hotel rooms in this hotel are suites, essentially. So even the standard room is just a studio suite, because that's what we did last time. This time I wanted to book this big suite so I could do a video and show you, because I really think that this is going to be an Airbnb killer, because we stayed in an Airbnb on our trip here, and basically you're having to put the laundry on, you're having to do all these other things that you just don't want to be doing, and you don't have to do in a hotel. Plus you get a pool and a gym in a hotel, whereas you don't get that in an Airbnb. And if you have any problems, you just go downstairs to the front desk. I already had some problems with the internet, and they just said, we'll move you room. Just as simple as that. Obviously they can't do that in an Airbnb. And most of the people running those Airbnbs, me having seen and met a lot of these people, I know now why that's the case. It's many just amateurs who don't have a clue what they're doing and just have no business sense whatsoever. So it's very interesting what's happening. So Airbnb, obviously, what's happening in New York definitely could come to Toronto. I could see this type thing happening in Toronto too. And obviously Toronto, the city of Toronto, is going to be watching that like a hawk, and other cities as well, like the city of Calgary and the city of Vancouver are going to be watching this as well. So, you're just going to see more regulation on this. Getting into this right now is just ridiculous, but we've seen loads of people getting into Airbnb over the past couple of years, and it shows you how it's a bubble. Again, going against all the fundamentals, not recognizing all the trends, just burying your head in the sand and getting all emotional and thinking, I just want to be an Airbnb host. I just saw it on a YouTube video or a YouTube advert or whatever. So anyway, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. So incredibly interesting what's happening in Toronto as well. Let me know in the comments what you think of that, and I'll see you down there. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, you might like this playlist here. You might like this video here. If you're looking for a VPN, you know where to go. Go to expressvpn.com/marketmania. You need a VPN to get around Bill C11. If you want to help support the channel, go to patreon.com/marketmania. I will see you in the next